Hi everyone, here's what's bothering me today. We are still at over 5,400 unmarked graves of Indigenous children that have been found on the grounds of residential schools across Canada. And there's still a lot more residential schools to go through. And while this is unfortunately faded from national conversation, especially due to the new election, the racism still abounds. And so a little while ago, like a week to maybe 10 days ago since of recording this, I saw a racist leave a comment somewhere on Facebook saying, well, what have natives ever done for us? Ugh. So welcome to Bothered Boy's summation of Indigenous history and how they've helped us. Let's see. For starters, the nation of Canada is settled by white people, and what gave white people the quote-unquote right, really it's just the permission to settle the land, were treaties with the Indigenous people. So right there, that's a pretty big thing that Indigenous people gave us. Next, a metric fuck ton of place names. Arguably most importantly, Canada is an Indigenous word. It means village. And Quebec just means where the river narrows. Ottawa, Winnipeg, Toronto as just three main examples of places that are now major population centers that are not rooted in English words. And many other place names have been corrupted into English or French from Indigenous terms, such as Restigouche, Quebec. And again, going back to the history, it was the natives who first, showed us around. That's one thing that always gets me, is how we idolize these old white explorers when really they were just the travel hipsters of their day. They were being led around by local guides and going, whoa, so fascinating, bro, I'm gonna post this on my Instagram. You think Mackenzie was the guy who just sailed up the now well-known Mackenzie River? You think he did that without Indigenous guides? Samuel Champlain has this hilarious statue sitting in Ottawa, and there used to be an image of a very stereotypical and offensively dressed Indigenous man who was known, and I'm not making this up, the Indian Scout. So that right there also shows that Champlain had to be led around. He wasn't really an explorer. He was one of the earliest tourists. And then again, because white people didn't know what they were doing back then, and the Indigenous people had millennia of experience by this point. Oh man, how come scurvy just happens and we keep losing our colonists in the dead of winter? Indigenous people teach them, hey, if you take some white cedar and you kind of mash it up and boil it into a concoction that tastes amazing, by the way, that is loaded with vitamin C and a few other nutrients, and there, look, no more scurvy. Also, here are cranberries. They're a local fruit and they're a great source of vitamin C. So I guess that brings us to the next thing that, they gave us, our foods. Granted, while the potato comes from the southern half of the Americas, it is still a New World food. All this corn we love eating, that's an Indigenous food. So much of the typical Canadian diet is based on, for the most part, New World foods. Corn, beans, squash, turkey, cranberries, potatoes. Modern day Thanksgiving is nothing without Indigenous food, which again, the Indigenous, as we know, in America and here in Canada, basically showed up with food because they took pity on the earliest settlers because they didn't know what the hell they were doing. And granted, there's still traditional foods like pemmican, muktuk, whipped soapberry, but none is more famous than maple syrup. You think maple syrup was invented by white people? There are several amazing Indigenous stories in explaining the process of how they made maple syrup, but also maple sugar, because that was far easier to transport. They also, again, showed people around the land. So they're teaching us what's here, how to use it, how to farm it, how to survive winters when you don't got no lime juice. The canoe, snowshoes. Our two national sports, ice hockey and lacrosse, are native things. The Mi'kmaq hockey stick is a point of pride for people to have ownership of. Now, of course, there was some knowledge we took. There's a lot of Indigenous knowledge that was lost and deliberately suppressed. But I don't want to get into too much of the depressing stuff. Lord knows I've covered that enough in previous videos. I want to focus on the actual celebration of good things natives have done in the past and in the present. It was an Indigenous man, Elijah Harper, who put to bed various notions of the Meech Lake Accord because it did not respect natives. Natives today continue to make great music, such as A Tribe Called Red, now the Hallucination. Indigenous people are sitting in the halls of Parliament, fighting for our rights and the betterment of all Canadians and communities. And they have literally fought and died to help defend this land. In the very pivotal Battle of Queenston's Heights, back in the War of 1812, which we never shut up about in this country, the first people to meet the Americans were Indigenous warriors. And then the people who came to reinforce them were black militiamen led by Richard Pierpoint, who I've talked about before. These two groups, again, not a white person among them, held off the advance until the British and Canadian militias could finally come by. A pivotal battle in Canadian history was won by Indigenous people. They have fought and died alongside various colonial forces and also as part of the Canadian military. They've served in world wars. They continue to serve to this day. And again, this is all stuff that's just coming to mind that I know about. There's probably still a metric ton of other really cool stuff that natives have done and given us, probably that we don't even know about, let alone appreciate. So yeah, random asshole on Facebook who is now the subject of this video. The natives have given you a home to live in, the success of your ancestors, and your disrespect towards them is so incredibly telling. First Nations communities in Canada have helped us out since the very beginning, and we have done nothing but suppress them and keep them under our heel. We owe so much to these people, and yet we continue to treat them this way. And that's what's bothering me today.